Think of your mind as a video camera. Your eyes, ears, and other sense organs are the lenses through which you perceive the world around you. According to ancient Buddhist texts, the video camera of our mind records about 65 discrete images or imprints in a single moment. These imprints are stored in our subconscious. They remain there for days, years, or decades, reproducing themselves every millisecond as separate moments of consciousness, one following another, appearing and disappearing like frames of a film strip, giving us the illusion of continuity. Imagine that consciousness is like very sensitive clay. Every time it comes into contact with something, that object leaves an imprint on it. Imprints in the mind, left in the first grade, like learning the alphabet, for example, carry forward, allowing you to read words in the second grade and beyond. In the West, we are not very accustomed to talking about the learning process as the purposeful planting of mental imprints. But if you think about it, that is exactly why we send our children to school. We expect the first grade teacher to plant a few useful mental imprints in our children's minds, and we hope these imprints will still be there when they go to college, so that in old age we don't have to live on a single pension. We fully recognize the idea of mental imprints, although we don't often think about how they function. Why, for example, our brain doesn't increase in size as we get older, even though it has to store all the accumulated clutter over the years. Let's talk about the mental imprints that make us consider neutral or empty things as good or bad. These traces of good or bad experiences are planted in 3 different ways: when we do something, say something, or even when we think about something. Our built-in video camera, our consciousness, is always on. One part of the mind is constantly recording everything we perceive through the lenses of our eyes, ears, and so on, including our thoughts. When you see yourself helping a colleague who's going through tough times, a good imprint appears in your mind. When you see yourself trying to deceive your customer or supplier, even a little, a bad imprint remains in your mind. The position of the intention-setting handle on the camera determines how strong or deep the imprint will become. If you help a coworker not because you genuinely care about them, but to ensure their problems don't affect production and your earnings, the positive imprint in your mind will be barely noticeable. If you help them because you understand that this problem is really making them unhappy, the good imprint will be much stronger. And if you help them, realizing the artificial division between I and you, and how one person's wound causes pain to all of us, in short, if you consciously decide to fight our common enemy, human suffering, then the imprint will be the most powerful possible. There are other settings to consider. First, there are emotions. If you decide to cheat your customer and are also very angry with them, the feeling of anger will equally intensify the negative imprint in your mind. Next is what we call identification. If you accidentally cheated the customer, for example, by misreading the price on the computer screen, the corresponding negative trace will be much weaker than if you clearly understood that you were stating an incorrect price. Ancient Tibetan wisdom books assert that even your ability to think clearly is nothing more than a sensation imposed on you by corresponding imprints embedded in your own mind in the past. They add that if you do not consistently adhere to the principle that kindness leads to good deeds, meaning if you consistently deny the very existence of this profound truth, your intellect will suffer. Those who have had the honor of living in close contact with Tibetan lamas have much to say about the supernatural insights these teachers sometimes display in the most ordinary situations. Once in India, a friend of mine was driving with a newly arrived lama, a refugee from Tibet. This was an elderly monk who had lived in a remote mountain region in the Himalayas and had literally just gotten into a car for the first time. The car broke down and the driver got out to open the hood and tinker with the engine. The Lama also got out because, as the ancient books say, it is useful to watch how people do things you do not yet know how to do, as you may learn something that could be useful later to help someone. He leaned over the engine, something he had never seen before, and in broken English, using the few words he knew, asked the driver about the workings of the various parts of the engine. Then he pointed to the carburetor and said, "This needs fixing." And of course he was right. I can just see the Lama's mind like a super powerful computer, running through all the possible functions of each part based on the explanations the driver had given. practically reinventing the sophisticated four-stroke internal combustion engine in his mind just by looking at it and imagining how it should work. And finally, with piercing logic, making the completely correct conclusion about which part was faulty. Such extraordinary abilities, the sharpness, clarity, and speed of thought when considering any problem, which are unattainable for most ordinary people, are not the result of genetic predisposition, a special diet, or even training. It is all about a sensation caused by a mental imprint, a trace left in the mind at a previous time. And the most reliable way to root such imprints is through understanding how imprints work, to create the world around us, and acting in accordance with this understanding, following the path of personal integrity and virtue.